Have you ever trusted someone completely in your workplace, only to discover that your loyalty was being auctioned to the highest bidder while you weren't looking? Here's a truth that no corporate training manual will ever teach you. The most devastating betrayals don't happen in boardrooms or through formal backstabbing. They unfold quietly in the everyday moments when you believe someone actually cares about your well-being. The restaurant driver who gave daily rides, the colleague who seemed genuine, the boss who appeared protective. These stories reveal how workplace trust becomes the very weapon used to destroy us. Every evening at closing time, while other employees rushed to catch buses or call expensive rides, Maria found herself with a guardian angel in work clothes. Carlos, the restaurant's delivery driver, had made it his personal mission to ensure she got home safely, despite living on the opposite side of town. His old sedan might not have been luxury, but his commitment in doing the right thing transformed that humble vehicle into something far more valuable than any executive car. The way he waited patiently by the staff exit, keys in hand and a genuine smile on his weathered face, spoke volumes about the kind of leadership that's becoming increasingly rare in today's professional world. Most people would calculate the cost of gas, the extra time, the inconvenience. But Carlos saw only a young woman who deserved to feel secure. This wasn't about romance or hidden agendas. This was about human decency. In a professional environment where such qualities often take a back seat to personal gain, his daily presence became as reliable as sunrise, a beacon of authentic care in a workplace where genuine intentions were as scarce as hen's teeth. What struck Maria most wasn't just the ride itself, but the thoughtfulness behind every gesture. Carlos would arrive exactly at closing time, never making her wait or feel rushed to finish her duties. He'd step out of the car to open her door, not out of outdated chivalry, but from a place of respect that acknowledged her worth as a person. During their conversations on those evening drives, she discovered that he lived nearly an hour away from her apartment, meaning his simple act of kindness cost him 2 additional hours every single day. Yet when she expressed concern about the inconvenience, he'd wave it off with that characteristic humility that genuine people possess. "It's nothing," he'd say, though they both knew it was everything. His consistency in showing up revealed a character trait that's become almost mythical in modern workplaces, the ability to follow through on commitments without expecting anything in return. The trust she felt wasn't just about physical safety, it was about knowing that someone's word actually meant something. The restaurant buzzed with the typical workplace dynamics, office politics, gossip, and the inevitable power plays that seemed to infect every professional environment. But Carlos operated outside these games, focusing on his deliveries during the day and his self-appointed guardian duties after hours. His colleagues noticed his routine, but respected the quiet dignity with which he carried himself. There was something almost anachronistic about his approach to leadership, like a character from an earlier era who somehow found himself in our cynical modern world. Maria began to look forward to those evening rides not just for the convenience, but for the reminder that authentic people still existed. However, what neither of them realized was that their simple arrangement was being observed by eyes that saw opportunity where others saw kindness. The seeds of betrayal were already being planted in soil that seemed too pure to nurture such bitter fruit. During their drives, Carlos would share stories from his years working at the restaurant, painting a picture of a professional environment that had gradually shifted from family-like closeness to corporate coldness. He'd worked there long enough to witness 3 ownership changes, each one bringing new policies that prioritized profit over people. His observations were sharp but never bitter. He understood business pressures while maintaining hope that human decency could coexist with commercial success. Maria found herself opening up about her own experiences, the challenges of being new in a workplace where alliances seemed to shift like sand dunes in the desert. These conversations became a masterclass in workplace psychology, delivered by someone who'd earned his wisdom through decades of quiet observation. The trust they built went beyond the simple driver-passenger relationship. It became a sanctuary of honesty, in an environment where authentic communication was increasingly rare. Little did she know that this very honesty would soon become the foundation for her greatest disappointment. Carlos never asked for gas money, never hinted at expecting favors, never made her feel indebted for his kindness. This absence of ulterior motives was so refreshing that Maria almost forgot such purity of intention could exist in professional relationships. She'd grown accustomed to workplace interactions being transactional, everyone wanting something, everyone calculating their next move. But here was someone who seemed to operate from a completely different playbook, one written in a language of genuine care rather than strategic positioning. His reliability became the one constant in her still new work environment, a touchstone of stability while she navigated the complex social dynamics of restaurant life. The other employees began to notice their routine, and while most viewed it with benign curiosity, some saw it as an opportunity to be exploited. The stage was being set for a lesson in how quickly trust can transform into betrayal when certain personalities enter the equation. The beauty of their arrangement lay not in grand gestures, but in consistent small acts of consideration. When rain threatened, Carlos would text to let her know he had an umbrella. When she mentioned feeling under the weather, he'd arrive with hot tea in a thermos. These weren't calculated moves designed to win favor. They were the natural expressions of someone who genuinely cared about another person's well-being. Maria had never experienced this level of thoughtful attention in any professional environment, and it began to restore her faith in workplace relationships. She started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where authentic human connections could flourish alongside professional responsibilities. The irony, of course, is that this very belief in the possibility of genuine workplace relationships would make the coming betrayal cut so much deeper. Sometimes our greatest strengths, our capacity for trust, our willingness to believe in others' good intentions, become the very vulnerabilities that others exploit. As days turned into weeks, their evening routine became as natural as breathing. Carlos would finish his last delivery, drive to the restaurant, and wait for Maria's shift to end. She'd emerge from the controlled chaos of dinner service to find him there, dependable as gravity, ready to ensure her safe passage home. This ritual became more than transportation. It became a daily affirmation that decent people still existed, that loyalty wasn't just a quaint concept from bygone eras, but in workplaces where power dynamics constantly shift and personal ambitions often override human decency, even the most innocent arrangements can become pawns in larger games. The restaurant owner had been watching this daily routine with the calculating eye of someone who saw opportunity in every human interaction. What appeared to Carlos and Maria as simple kindness looked very different through the lens of someone who viewed workplace relationships as resources to be exploited rather than connections to be cherished. In a workplace where superficial pleasantries masked deeper calculations, Maria's words about Carlos carried the weight of profound recognition. "He's the only one there who seems genuine," she'd confide to friends, her voice carrying that rare tone of someone who'd discovered something precious in an unexpected place. The restaurant environment, like many professional environments, had become a theater where everyone played roles designed to advance their positions rather than reveal their true selves. Servers smiled at customers they privately mocked. Managers praised employees they planned to replace, and colleagues shared fake camaraderie while secretly competing for the same opportunities. But Carlos operated outside this performance, his interactions unmarked by the strategic thinking that poisoned most workplace relationships. His authenticity stood out like a lighthouse in fog, providing Maria with something she hadn't even realized she'd been desperately seeking: the trust that comes from knowing someone's actions align with their intentions. This recognition of genuine character would make the eventual betrayal all the more devastating, because betrayal always cuts deepest when it shatters our faith in our own judgment. The concept of authenticity in professional environments has become so rare that when we encounter it, we almost don't know how to respond. Maria's comment revealed her sophisticated understanding of workplace dynamics. She could distinguish between performative kindness and genuine care, between strategic relationship building and authentic human connection. Carlos possessed that increasingly uncommon quality of being exactly who he appeared to be, without hidden agendas or carefully crafted personas. His consistency across different situations, whether dealing with difficult customers, managing delivery complications, or simply waiting for Maria after work, revealed a character built on solid foundations rather than convenient facades. In contrast, Most of her other colleagues seemed to shift their personalities based on who was watching, what they hoped to gain, or what impression they wanted to create. The loyalty Carlos demonstrated wasn't conditional on audience or advantage. It was simply how he chose to move through the world. This stark difference made him feel like an anchor in a workplace where most relationships felt as stable as quicksand. Maria's observation about Carlos being the only one who seemed real spoke to a deeper psychological need that many people experience in modern work environments. We hunger for genuine connection, for relationships that transcend the transactional nature of professional obligations. She'd grown weary of conversations that felt like chess matches, where every statement was calculated for maximum strategic advantage. With Carlos, she could simply be herself, tired after a long shift, frustrated with difficult customers, uncertain about her future plans, without worrying that her honesty would be weaponized against her later. This freedom to be vulnerable in a professional context is incredibly rare and incredibly valuable. It creates a space where real trust can develop, where trust grows organically rather than being manufactured for strategic purposes. However, this very authenticity can become a liability when others in the workplace view genuine relationships as opportunities to be exploited rather than treasures to be protected. The psychology behind recognizing authenticity is fascinating. We develop almost supernatural instincts for detecting genuine versus performative behavior. Maria's ability to identify Carlos as real while seeing through the facades of others revealed her own emotional intelligence and perhaps her own authentic nature. Like recognizes like, and authentic people often find each other in environments filled with strategic performers. This recognition creates a bond that goes beyond mere workplace convenience. It becomes a sanctuary where both parties can drop their professional masks and simply be human. Carlos never had to work to appear genuine because he simply was genuine. His actions flowed from his values rather than from calculations about personal benefit. This natural authenticity made their interactions feel effortless and restorative, a daily reminder that honest human connection was still possible, even in environments that seemed to punish such openness. The professional environment they shared became more bearable because of this authentic connection, but it also made them both more vulnerable to those who saw their genuine relationship as something to be manipulated. What Maria recognized in Carlos was the rare quality of emotional consistency. He treated everyone with the same baseline respect, regardless of their position in the workplace hierarchy. He wasn't performing kindness for the managers while treating subordinates poorly, nor was he seeking to ingratiate himself with those who might advance his career. His authenticity was democratic. It extended to everyone from the dishwashers to the district manager. This consistency is what genuine people possess. Their character doesn't fluctuate based on external circumstances or potential benefits. Maria had learned to appreciate this stability because she'd experienced too many relationships where people's treatment of her changed based on what they thought she could do for them. The trust she felt with Carlos was rooted in predictability, not the boring kind, but the reassuring kind that comes from knowing someone's core values are fixed points in an ever-changing world. This predictability would make the coming betrayal even more shocking, because it would seem to contradict everything she thought she understood about reading people accurately. In describing Carlos as genuine, Maria was also unconsciously comparing him to the owner and others in management who demonstrated the opposite qualities. She'd observed how these individuals could turn charm on and off like a faucet, how their treatment of employees varied dramatically based on what they hoped to achieve. The owner, in particular, had a reputation for performative kindness that masked more calculating intentions, a pattern that several former employees had learned to recognize too late. Carlos represented the antithesis of this approach. His kindness wasn't a tool to be deployed strategically, but a fundamental aspect of his character. This difference made their relationship feel safe in a way that workplace relationships rarely do. She could trust that his motivations were transparent, that his actions aligned with his stated intentions, and that his care for her well-being was genuine rather than calculated. The loyalty he demonstrated daily created a foundation of security that allowed her to relax her defensive instincts, a relaxation that would soon be exploited by someone who understood exactly how to weaponize trust. The tragic irony of Maria's recognition of Carlos's authenticity is that it simultaneously represented her greatest insight and her greatest vulnerability. Her ability to identify genuine character was sophisticated and accurate, but her relief at finding someone real in a workplace full of performers made her guard down in other areas. She became so grateful for Carlos's authenticity that she perhaps didn't scrutinize other relationships with the same careful attention. The contrast between Carlos's genuine nature and the calculated behavior of others was so stark that it created a false sense of security about her ability to navigate workplace dynamics. She'd found her authentic ally, but this discovery made her more susceptible to manipulation by those who understood how to exploit the very human need for genuine connection. The disappointment that awaited her would be particularly devastating, because it would force her to question not just others' motivations, but her own judgment about who could be trusted in professional environments where authenticity is both precious and dangerous. For 4 consecutive days, Carlos transformed what could have been mere transportation into a masterclass in human consideration. His punctuality wasn't the rigid clock-watching kind that comes from obligation, but the respectful kind that acknowledges another person's time as valuable. Every evening, he'd arrive precisely as Maria's shift ended, eliminating that anxious waiting period that characterizes so many workplace pickup arrangements. The simple act of opening her car door spoke volumes about his character, not because the gesture itself was extraordinary, but because it was consistent, offered without fanfare, and performed regardless of weather or his own fatigue level. When the temperature dropped and evening air turned sharp with winter's bite, he'd appear with hot chocolate, steam rising from the cup like a small beacon of warmth in the restaurant's harsh parking lot lighting. These weren't grand romantic gestures designed to impress. They were the daily expressions of someone who genuinely cared about another person's comfort and well-being. The trust Maria felt grew not from dramatic displays, but from this reliable thoughtfulness that seemed as natural to Carlos as breathing. The psychology behind such consistent kindness reveals character depths that many people never develop or choose not to express. Carlos understood that true care isn't demonstrated through occasional grand gestures, but through sustained attention to small details that make another person's life easier. His hot chocolate wasn't just a warm drink. It was tangible proof that he'd thought about her comfort while going about his own evening routine. The punctuality wasn't just good manners. It was recognition that her time mattered, and that reliability was a form of respect. Opening the car door wasn't outdated chivalry. It was acknowledgement of her worth as a person deserving of consideration. These details created a pattern of behavior that spoke to deeply held values about how people should treat one another in any professional environment or personal relationship. The loyalty he demonstrated through these small acts was more powerful than any dramatic declaration could have been, because it was proven through daily action rather than proclaimed through empty words. What distinguished Carlos's approach was the absence of expectation that accompanied his kindness. Many people perform thoughtful acts as investments, unconsciously keeping score and expecting reciprocation or recognition. But Carlos seemed to operate from a different paradigm entirely, one where kindness was its own reward, and thoughtfulness was simply how decent people moved through the world. The hot chocolate appeared without announcement or requests for gratitude. The punctuality continued regardless of whether Maria commented on its reliability. The door opening persisted even when she insisted she could manage herself. This lack of performative elements made his gestures feel pure, in a way that workplace kindnesses rarely do. Maria had grown accustomed to colleagues who performed helpfulness when supervisors were watching, or who offered assistance with obvious strings attached. Carlos's consistency across different audiences and circumstances revealed authenticity that was becoming increasingly rare in her professional environment. The trust she felt deepened not just because of what he did, but because of how naturally and unpretentiously he did it. The 4 days of perfect consistency created what psychologists call a trust pattern, a reliable sequence of positive interactions that builds confidence in future behavior. Each evening, Maria could count on finding Carlos waiting, could anticipate his considerate gestures, could relax into the security of knowing someone was thinking about her well-being. This predictability became precious in a workplace where so many other elements felt uncertain or potentially volatile. The hot chocolate on cold evenings showed that he was paying attention to external circumstances that might affect her comfort, a level of thoughtfulness that suggested genuine caring rather than obligatory politeness. His attention to these details created a sanctuary of consideration. In an environment where employees often felt like interchangeable resources rather than individual people with specific needs and preferences. The loyalty he demonstrated through consistent small kindnesses was building something beautiful and rare, a workplace relationship based on authentic mutual care rather than strategic advantage. The beauty of Carlos's approach lay in how effortlessly he made extraordinary kindness appear ordinary. He never drew attention to his thoughtfulness, never sought recognition for going above and beyond normal colleague expectations. The hot chocolate simply appeared when needed. The punctuality was simply maintained without discussion. The door was simply opened as a matter of course. This understated approach to caring created an atmosphere where kindness felt natural rather than performative. Maria began to experience what it felt like to be consistently considered, to have someone anticipate her needs without being asked, to trust that someone's actions would match their intentions day after day. These experiences were reshaping her understanding of what workplace relationships could be, expanding her definition of professional trust to include genuine personal care. However, this very expansion of trust would soon make her more vulnerable to those who understood how to exploit newly opened hearts and minds. The consistency of Carlos's thoughtfulness over those 4 days was creating something psychologically powerful. A new baseline for how she expected to be treated by people who claimed to care about her well-being. When someone demonstrates reliable kindness, it recalibrates our expectations about human behavior and makes us more trusting of similar gestures from others. Carlos was inadvertently making Maria more susceptible to manipulation by raising her baseline trust level and making her believe that consistent kindness was more common than it actually is in most professional environments. His genuine gestures were creating a template that others could mimic for their own purposes, using the language of care that Carlos spoke fluently but with entirely different motivations. The disappointment that was approaching would be particularly devastating because it would not only betray Maria's trust, but also taint her memory of these beautiful 4 days when someone had cared for her so consistently and purely. As the 4th day ended, and Carlos drove Maria home with the same thoughtful attention he'd shown since the beginning of their routine, neither of them could have imagined that this would be their last evening of uncomplicated kindness. The hot chocolate warmed her hands as his presence warmed her faith in human decency, creating a perfect moment of trust and care that would soon be shattered by forces they hadn't seen approaching. Sometimes the most beautiful relationships make us most vulnerable to betrayal, because they teach us to expect goodness from others and lower our defenses accordingly. The very kindness that Carlos had shown so genuinely would soon be weaponized by someone who understood exactly how to exploit the trust that authentic relationships create. But for now, in the warmth of that car with steam rising from her cup and gratitude filling her heart, Maria felt safer and more cared for than she had in any professional environment she'd ever known. A feeling that would make the coming betrayal cut deeper than any professional betrayal she could have imagined. The 5th day arrived with the same routine that had become as dependable as sunrise. Carlos sending his usual message to let Maria know he was waiting in the parking lot. But technology, that supposedly reliable connector of human lives, chose this moment to reveal its own version of betrayal. The message he sent into the digital void carried all the same care and consideration that had characterized their previous 4 evenings together, yet it floated in electronic limbo, marked with those 3 devastating words: message not delivered. In our hyper-connected world, we've come to expect instant communication, immediate confirmation that our attempts to reach others have succeeded. The trust we place in technology mirrors the trust we invest in human relationships. We assume our messages will arrive, our calls will connect, our attempts to maintain connection will be reciprocated. But sometimes the failure of technology serves as a metaphor for the failure of human connection, revealing truths that we might prefer to avoid. Carlos, sitting in his car with the engine running and hot chocolate growing cold, had no way of knowing that his message existed in digital purgatory, just as he had no way of knowing that Maria's loyalty existed in similar limbo. The psychology of undelivered messages in the digital age reveals our deep dependence on technological validation of human connection. When we send a message, we expect acknowledgement, read receipts, response bubbles, some digital breadcrumb that confirms our communication has been received and processed. The absence of such confirmation creates a peculiar form of anxiety, a technological frustration that mirrors deeper fears about human rejection and abandonment. Carlos experienced this digital silence as a form of rejection, his reliable communication pattern suddenly disrupted by forces beyond his control. The message that didn't reach Maria became a symbol of the broader communication breakdown that was occurring in their relationship, though he couldn't yet understand the full scope of what was happening. In our interconnected world, we've learned to read meaning into digital signals, delivered versus undelivered, read versus unread, responded to versus ignored. These technological indicators become the modern language of relationship status, carrying emotional weight that previous generations might have found absurd, but that feels profoundly real to those of us navigating connection in the digital age. The irony of undelivered messages is that they often arrive at the most crucial moments, when clear communication could prevent misunderstandings or reveal important truths. Carlos's message, floating in digital limbo, carried the same thoughtful consideration that had characterized all his previous communications with Maria. He wasn't demanding or entitled in his messaging. He was simply following the courteous pattern they'd established of letting her know when he'd arrived. The failure of this message to reach its destination created a gap in their communication pattern that would be filled by assumptions and misunderstandings rather than facts and clarity. Relationships, both personal and professional, these gaps often become breeding grounds for doubt, suspicion, and eventual betrayal. The professional environment they shared was about to be disrupted not by any failure of intention or care, but by the simple failure of technology to deliver a message that might have changed everything. Sometimes the most significant betrayals begin not with dramatic confrontations, but with simple communication failures that create space for more serious deceptions to flourish. The concept of digital reliability has become so integrated into our daily lives that when it fails, it feels like a personal rejection rather than a technological glitch. Carlos, waiting in the parking lot with his customary patience, couldn't have known that his considerate message was trapped in electronic limbo, while Maria remained inside the restaurant, unaware that her reliable ride home was sitting just outside. This disconnect between intention and reception created the perfect conditions for misunderstanding and eventual betrayal. In the absence of clear communication, people fill gaps with assumptions that often reflect their own insecurities or fears rather than actual facts. The undelivered message became a symbol of the broader communication breakdown that was occurring in their relationship, though neither of them could have predicted how this simple technological failure would contribute to a much more complex human betrayal. The trust they'd built over 4 days of consistent communication was about to be tested by forces they couldn't see or control, setting the stage for a lesson in how quickly trust can be undermined when clarity is absent. Digital communication has created new forms of vulnerability that previous generations never had to navigate. We've learned to read emotional significance into response times, delivery confirmations, and the presence or absence of digital acknowledgement. Carlos's undelivered message represented more than just a communication failure. It symbolized the broader fragility of human connection in an age where technology mediates so many of our interactions. The loyalty he demonstrated through consistent, considerate communication was about to be tested by circumstances beyond his control, creating doubt where certainty had previously existed. Maria, unaware that technology had failed them both, would be left to interpret his apparent absence according to her own fears and assumptions rather than the facts of his continued faithfulness. In professional environments where relationships are already complicated by power dynamics and competing interests, these communication failures can become catalysts for much larger betrayals. The absence of his message would create space for other influences to fill the void, influences that didn't share Carlos's genuine intentions or authentic care. The tragedy of undelivered messages is that they often carry the most important communications, apologies that could heal wounds, explanations that could prevent misunderstandings, or simple gestures of care that could maintain connection during difficult times. Carlos's message, trapped in digital limbo, contained the same thoughtful consideration that had characterized all his previous communications with Maria. It represented continuity, reliability, and care, all the qualities that had made their relationship feel safe and dependable. But in the absence of this digital confirmation, doubt began to creep into spaces where trust had previously flourished. The failure of technology to deliver his message created an opportunity for others to fill the communication void with their own agenda, their own version of events, their own interpretation of what Carlos's apparent absence meant. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals begin not with dramatic confrontations, but with simple failures of communication that create space for more complex deceptions to take root and flourish. As Carlos sat in the parking lot, checking his phone repeatedly for any sign that his message had been delivered or received, he couldn't have imagined that this technological failure was about to set in motion a chain of events that would test everything he believed about loyalty, trust, and human nature itself. The undelivered message became a metaphor for all the ways that genuine care can be misunderstood, misinterpreted, or simply lost in the noise of a world where authentic intentions are often drowned out by louder, more manipulative voices. The frustration he felt at the apparent lack of response was about to be compounded by discoveries that would challenge his faith in human decency and force him to confront the reality that not everyone operates from the same ethical framework that guided his own actions. But for now, in the growing darkness of the restaurant parking lot, he continued to wait with the same patient kindness that had characterized his approach to their relationship from the very beginning, unaware that his world was about to change in ways that would test every assumption he'd made about trust, loyalty, and the nature of human connection in professional environments. The truth arrived with the casual cruelty that workplace gossip often carries, delivered not through careful consideration or gentle concern, but through the offhand comment of a colleague who had witnessed something that shattered Maria's carefully constructed narrative. She left with the owner. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would eventually become tsunamis of disappointment and betrayal. The colleague spoke with the detached tone of someone sharing routine workplace information, unaware that these simple words were demolishing 4 days of trust, consideration, and genuine human connection. In professional environments, information travels through informal networks faster than official communications, and the most devastating revelations often arrive through these casual conversations rather than formal announcements. The professional environment that had seemed to nurture authentic relationships suddenly revealed its true nature, a place where loyalty could be discarded as easily as yesterday's uniform, where trust could be weaponized by those who understood how to exploit human vulnerability. Carlos absorbed this information with the stunned silence of someone whose worldview was being systematically dismantled by a reality he'd never imagined possible. The owner's reputation preceded him like a shadow that many employees had learned to navigate carefully. His pattern of inappropriate behavior toward female staff members wasn't exactly a secret, though it was the kind of open secret that organizations often tolerate, because addressing it would require confronting uncomfortable truths about power dynamics and workplace culture. Several former employees had left under circumstances that those who remained understood, but rarely discussed openly. The owner possessed that particular combination of charm and authority that allows certain individuals to operate with impunity in professional settings, using their position to pursue personal interests while maintaining plausible deniability about their true motivations. His interest in female employees was predatory rather than professional, strategic rather than spontaneous, calculated rather than casual. The betrayal Maria had committed wasn't just personal. It was participation in a pattern of behavior that had damaged other women before her and would likely continue long after she was gone. Carlos's colleague delivered this information with the weary tone of someone who had witnessed this cycle repeat itself multiple times, each iteration following the same predictable pattern of manipulation, exploitation, and eventual abandonment. What made this revelation particularly devastating was the contrast it created with the authentic care Carlos had demonstrated. While he had been offering genuine kindness without expectation of return, Maria had been drawn into a web of manipulation that exploited her desire for security and advancement. The owner's approach was the antithesis of Carlos's authenticity, calculated where Carlos was spontaneous, strategic where Carlos was genuine, exploitative where Carlos was generous. This stark difference highlighted not just Maria's poor judgment, but the broader challenge of navigating workplace relationships, where authentic and inauthentic motivations can appear superficially similar. The trust she had placed in the wrong person revealed her vulnerability to manipulation by those who understood how to mimic the language of care while serving entirely different purposes. The colleague's revelation forced Carlos to confront the reality that his authentic gestures of kindness had been competing with more sophisticated forms of manipulation, and that innocence and genuineness are often no match for calculated charm and strategic positioning in professional environments, where power differentials create opportunities for exploitation. The psychology of workplace betrayal often involves the exploitation of fundamental human needs: security, recognition, advancement, belonging, by those who understand how to weaponize these needs for personal gain. The owner's success in attracting Maria away from Carlos's genuine care demonstrated the effectiveness of his manipulative approach, which offered immediate gratification and the illusion of special treatment rather than the steady reliability of authentic relationship. Carlos had offered transportation and consideration. The owner offered access to power and the intoxicating feeling of being chosen by someone important. This comparison reveals uncomfortable truths about human nature and the ways that immediate rewards can override long-term wisdom, especially when someone is skilled at presenting manipulation as opportunity. The loyalty Carlos had demonstrated was pure but perhaps naive in its assumption that good intentions would be recognized and valued over more sophisticated forms of seduction. The workplace had become a battlefield between authentic and inauthentic approaches to human connection, and authenticity had lost this particular battle to strategic manipulation and calculated charm. The colleague's casual revelation also highlighted the role that workplace observers play in these dynamics. People who see patterns, understand implications, but often remain silent until the damage is already done. These individuals possess valuable insights about organizational culture, power dynamics, and predatory behavior, but their information often arrives too late to prevent harm. The professional environment creates complex loyalties and fears that discourage people from speaking up about problematic behavior, especially when it involves those in positions of authority. The colleague who informed Carlos about Maria's departure likely had observed the owner's pattern of behavior for months or years, understood its implications, but felt powerless or unwilling to intervene directly. This passive observation of workplace toxicity is itself a form of complicity that allows harmful patterns to continue unchecked. The information that could have protected Maria from manipulation was available within the workplace community, but the social and professional pressures that discouraged direct intervention meant that this knowledge remained unused until it was too late to prevent the betrayal that was already in motion. The devastating efficiency with which workplace gossip can destroy trust reveals the fragility of authentic relationships in environments where information becomes currency and personal connections become fodder for casual conversation. The colleague's revelation didn't just inform Carlos about Maria's choice, it forced him to reconstruct his understanding of their relationship, her character, and his own judgment about human nature. The 4 days of thoughtful gestures, genuine care, and growing trust suddenly appeared in a different light, not as the foundation of meaningful connection, but as the naive offerings of someone who fundamentally misunderstood the game being played around him. This reconstruction of memory and meaning is one of the most painful aspects of betrayal, because it requires not just accepting present disappointment, but reinterpreting past experiences that had seemed genuine and meaningful. The frustration Carlos felt wasn't just about losing a relationship. It was about discovering that the relationship he thought he had never actually existed in the way he had understood it. The casual cruelty of workplace information networks was fully revealed in how this devastating news was delivered, not with sensitivity or concern for its impact, but as routine gossip that treated human relationships as entertainment rather than sacred connections deserving of respect and care. The colleague who shared this information likely had no malicious intent, but the thoughtless delivery of relationship-destroying news reflected the broader cultural devaluation of authentic human connection in professional settings. Carlos received this information while still processing his confusion about the undelivered message, still hoping for explanations that would preserve his faith in Maria's character and their connection. Instead, he got clarity that was more devastating than continued confusion would have been, because it revealed not just what had happened, but what kind of person he had misjudged so completely. The betrayal was complete, not just because Maria had chosen someone else, but because that choice revealed values and priorities that were fundamentally incompatible with the authentic connection Carlos had believed they were building together. Carlos's response to betrayal revealed the profound difference between authentic character and performative reaction. He chose silence over drama, dignity over confrontation, withdrawal over retaliation. While many people would have demanded explanations, created scenes, or sought public vindication of their wounded feelings, Carlos simply stopped appearing, his absence speaking louder than any words could have expressed. This wasn't passive-aggressive manipulation or strategic positioning. It was the natural response of someone whose trust had been shattered and who understood that some violations of trust are so complete that they require no further discussion. His decision to begin giving rides to other colleagues demonstrated practical wisdom about redirecting his generosity toward people who might actually value authentic kindness, rather than see it as weakness to be exploited. The professional environment continued around him, but Carlos had fundamentally altered his approach to workplace relationships, moving from naive openness to informed selectivity about where to invest his emotional energy. The transformation wasn't bitter or vengeful. It was simply realistic about human nature and the necessity of protecting oneself from those who view genuine care as opportunity rather than gift. The psychology behind choosing silence over confrontation reveals sophisticated emotional intelligence that many people never develop. Carlos understood intuitively that demanding explanations from someone who had demonstrated such poor judgment would only provide opportunities for further manipulation and self-deception. Maria's choice to leave with the owner had communicated everything necessary about her values, priorities, and character. No verbal explanation could change or improve upon that revelation. His silence wasn't punishment or passive aggression. It was recognition that some betrayals are so complete that they render further communication pointless. The loyalty he had offered authentically had been discarded for strategic advantage, and continuing to engage would only subject himself to additional manipulation by someone who had already proven capable of profound deception. This mature approach to betrayal, withdrawing energy rather than demanding satisfaction, protected Carlos from further harm while maintaining his own dignity and emotional integrity. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal is simply to stop participating in relationships that don't honor authentic connection. His decision to redirect his driving services to other colleagues demonstrated both practical wisdom and emotional health. Rather than allowing Maria's betrayal to make him cynical about all workplace relationships, Carlos chose to continue offering the same genuine kindness, but to direct it toward people who might actually appreciate its value. This approach revealed his understanding that the problem wasn't with his authentic nature, but with his judgment about who deserved access to that authenticity. The other colleagues who began receiving rides from Carlos likely had no idea they were benefiting from Maria's poor choices, but they were receiving the same thoughtful consideration that she had discarded. This redirection of energy showed Carlos's ability to learn from betrayal without becoming bitter, to maintain his generous nature while becoming more selective about its recipients. The trust he was willing to extend to new people remained genuine, but it was now informed by hard-won wisdom about human nature and the importance of investing emotional energy in people who share similar values about loyalty and authentic connection. The power of silent withdrawal as a response to betrayal lies in its refusal to engage with manipulation or provide opportunities for further deception. Carlos's absence from Maria's routine spoke more clearly than any angry confrontation could have about the depth of her betrayal and the finality of its consequences. By simply stopping his evening routine without explanation or drama, he communicated that some actions have natural consequences that don't require discussion or negotiation. This approach avoided the trap that many betrayed people fall into, continuing to engage with manipulative individuals in hopes of receiving apologies, explanations, or closure that will somehow make sense of senseless behavior. The frustration that comes from betrayal often drives people to seek understanding from those who are fundamentally incapable of providing it, creating cycles of continued disappointment and manipulation. Carlos's withdrawal broke this cycle before it could begin, protecting his emotional energy for relationships that deserved it, while refusing to reward betrayal with continued attention and engagement. The practical wisdom of redirecting his generosity toward other colleagues demonstrated Carlos's ability to separate the specific betrayal from his general approach to human relationships. Many people respond to betrayal by becoming cynical about everyone, closing their hearts to protect themselves from future disappointment. But Carlos understood that Maria's poor judgment reflected her character rather than some universal truth about human nature. His willingness to continue offering rides to other colleagues showed his recognition that authentic kindness shouldn't be abandoned because one person failed to appreciate its value. This discriminating approach to trust, remaining open to new connections while being more careful about who receives access to vulnerability, represents emotional maturity that many people never achieve. The loyalty he continued to offer was now informed by experience rather than naivety, making it both more valuable and more appropriately directed toward people who shared his values about authentic relationship and mutual respect. The transformation in Carlos's workplace behavior created ripple effects that extended far beyond his relationship with Maria. Other colleagues began to notice his reliability, his genuine consideration, and his authentic approach to workplace relationships. Those who received rides from him experienced the same thoughtful attention that Maria had discarded: punctuality, open doors, consideration for their comfort and safety. These new recipients of his kindness likely had no idea they were benefiting from someone else's poor judgment, but they were receiving an education in what authentic care looks like in professional relationships. Carlos's continued generosity, now more selectively applied, became a model for how to maintain one's authentic nature while learning from betrayal. The professional environment was being influenced by his example of dignified response to disappointment, showing others that it's possible to maintain integrity while protecting oneself from those who don't share similar values about loyalty and authentic human connection. The elegant simplicity of Carlos's response, silence, withdrawal, and redirection, represented a masterclass in handling betrayal with grace while maintaining personal integrity. He didn't seek revenge, demand apologies, or create workplace drama that would have diminished his own character, while providing Maria with opportunities to manipulate the situation further. Instead, he simply removed his energy from a relationship that had proven unworthy of it, and invested that same energy in connections that might prove more deserving. This approach demonstrated sophisticated understanding of human psychology and relationship dynamics, recognizing that some people will always choose strategic advantage over authentic connection, but that this choice reflects their limitations rather than the worthlessness of authenticity itself. The disappointment he had experienced was transformed into wisdom rather than bitterness, knowledge rather than cynicism, informed selectivity rather than closed-hearted withdrawal from all human connection. His silent dignity became its own form of victory, proving that authentic character can survive betrayal while maintaining the very qualities that make genuine relationships possible. Days passed in the peculiar atmosphere that follows workplace betrayal, a mix of awkward avoidance and underlying tension that everyone can feel but no one directly addresses. Maria, perhaps driven by guilt, denial, or simply the human inability to sit comfortably with the consequences of poor choices, decided to attempt conversation with Carlos, as if their previous relationship could be magically restored through the simple act of pretending nothing had changed. Her approach revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how trust works, the naive belief that trust, once broken, can be repaired through casual interaction rather than genuine accountability and demonstrated change. The professional environment had witnessed her choice, absorbed the implications and moved on. But Maria seemed to exist in a bubble where consequences could be ignored through sheer force of social convention. This attempt to normalize their interaction after such a profound betrayal demonstrated either remarkable emotional immaturity or calculated manipulation designed to ease her own discomfort with the situation she had created. Carlos, having already processed the betrayal and moved on emotionally, was about to demonstrate what authentic boundary setting looks like when delivered with precision, dignity, and devastating clarity. The psychology behind attempting to act normal after betraying someone reveals deep misunderstanding about the nature of relationship and consequence. Maria's approach suggested she believed that social pleasantries could override the fundamental shift that had occurred in their dynamic, that casual conversation could somehow restore the loyalty she had discarded for strategic advantage. This thinking reflects a transactional view of relationships where interactions are seen as exchanges that can be balanced through social behaviors rather than expressions of deeper character and values. Her attempt to engage Carlos as if nothing had happened revealed either genuine delusion about the impact of her choices or calculated hope that he would be too polite, too kind, or too professionally constrained to address her betrayal directly. This miscalculation was about to provide her with a painful education about the difference between authentic kindness and weakness, between genuine forgiveness and enabling bad behavior. The frustration that Carlos had processed privately was about to find its voice in a response that would clarify exactly where they stood and eliminate any possibility of future confusion about their relationship status. Carlos's response: "Now you have an executive driver, remember?" delivered with the surgical precision of someone who had thought carefully about boundaries and consequences, represented a masterpiece of dignified confrontation. The words carried multiple layers of meaning: acknowledgement of her choice, recognition of what she had prioritized, and clear communication that their previous relationship was permanently altered by her decisions. This wasn't cruel retaliation or bitter sarcasm. It was simply factual observation delivered with the kind of clarity that prevents further manipulation or misunderstanding. His response demonstrated sophisticated emotional intelligence, the ability to address betrayal directly without descending into drama, to set boundaries firmly without becoming vindictive, to communicate consequences clearly without becoming petty. The disappointment he had experienced was transformed into wisdom that allowed him to respond authentically while maintaining his own integrity and emotional health. This moment represented the difference between someone who had learned from betrayal and someone who was still trying to avoid responsibility for the consequences of their choices. The devastating effectiveness of Carlos's response lay not in its cruelty, but in its absolute accuracy. Maria had indeed chosen an executive driver over his authentic care, trading genuine consideration for access to power and status. His words forced her to confront the reality of what she had done without allowing her to hide behind social conventions or pretend that consequences could be avoided through pleasant conversation. This direct confrontation with reality is often what people who betray others fear most: being seen clearly for what they have chosen and having those choices reflected back to them without softening or excuse-making. The betrayal she had committed was being acknowledged openly, its implications laid bare, its consequences made explicit. Carlos's response eliminated any possibility that their previous relationship could be restored through simple social interaction, establishing clear boundaries about what kind of treatment he would accept and what kinds of relationships he was willing to maintain. This clarity, while perhaps painful for Maria to receive, was actually a gift, the gift of honest feedback about the impact of her choices. The broader implications of this exchange extended beyond their personal dynamic to reveal important truths about workplace relationships and the importance of authentic accountability. Maria's attempt to normalize their interaction after betraying his trust represented a pattern that many people follow, hoping that time and social convention will allow them to avoid facing the consequences of their choices. Carlos's response demonstrated that authentic people don't participate in these social fictions, don't enable others to avoid responsibility for their actions, and don't sacrifice their own integrity to maintain comfortable illusions. His willingness to address the betrayal directly, while maintaining his own dignity, provided a model for how to respond to workplace dynamics that violate basic principles of loyalty and authentic relationship. The professional environment needed this kind of clarity, this refusal to participate in the social games that allow harmful behavior to continue unchecked. His response served notice that some people won't enable others to avoid the natural consequences of their choices, even when doing so might seem socially easier or professionally safer. The timing and delivery of Carlos's response revealed careful thought and emotional processing, rather than reactive anger or wounded pride. He had clearly moved through his initial hurt and disappointment to reach a place of clarity about boundaries and consequences. This emotional journey from betrayal to wisdom allowed him to respond from a position of strength rather than vulnerability, making his words more powerful and less susceptible to being dismissed as emotional reaction. The trust he had offered Maria was now redirected toward protecting himself and maintaining relationships that honored authentic connection rather than exploited it. His response demonstrated that forgiveness doesn't require enabling continued bad behavior, that kindness doesn't mean accepting disrespect, and that maintaining professional relationships doesn't require pretending that betrayals haven't occurred. This sophisticated understanding of relationship dynamics and personal boundaries represented hard-won wisdom about how to navigate workplace environments where authentic and inauthentic people often occupy the same spaces and compete for the same resources. The permanent shift in their relationship dynamic was crystallized in that single exchange. Maria's attempt to restore normalcy met with Carlos's clear communication that their previous relationship was irretrievably altered by her choices. This moment represented the natural consequence of betrayal, the loss of access to authentic care from someone who had offered it genuinely. The loyalty she had discarded couldn't be retrieved through casual conversation, and the trust she had violated couldn't be restored through pretending the violation hadn't occurred. Carlos's response provided closure for both of them. For him, the satisfaction of clear boundary setting and authentic communication. For her, the unavoidable recognition that some choices have permanent consequences that can't be undone through social pleasantries or wishful thinking. The workplace would continue around them, but their relationship had been permanently redefined by her choices and his response, creating a new dynamic based on clear understanding rather than confused expectations about what kinds of interactions were possible or appropriate, given what had transpired between them. Months passed like pages in a book that writes itself through the natural unfolding of character and consequence, and the universe revealed its peculiar sense of justice through the systematic dismantling of everything that had seemed so secure when Maria made her fateful choice. Carlos had channeled his entrepreneurial spirit and work ethic into building his own transportation service, transforming the frustration of betrayal into the fuel for personal growth and independence. His business flourished because it was built on the same authentic principles that had guided his approach to relationships: reliability, consideration, genuine care for clients' needs and comfort. Meanwhile, the restaurant owner's empire crumbled under the weight of poor decisions, ethical shortcuts, and the kind of character flaws that eventually catch up with those who prioritize manipulation over substance. The professional environment that had once seemed to reward his predatory behavior ultimately revealed its own judgment through market forces and natural consequences that no amount of charm or manipulation could overcome. The irony was exquisite. The man who had appeared to offer security and advancement had actually represented the opposite, while the humble driver who had been discarded was building something lasting and meaningful through honest work and authentic character. The psychology of entrepreneurial success often reflects the same character traits that make someone trustworthy in personal relationships: integrity, reliability, customer focus, and the ability to deliver consistently on promises made. Carlos's business grew because clients experienced the same thoughtful attention that Maria had once received and discarded: punctuality, consideration, genuine care for their comfort and safety. His success wasn't accidental. It was the natural result of applying authentic character traits to business relationships, where such qualities are both rare and highly valued. The trust that clients placed in his service was earned through the same daily demonstrations of reliability that had characterized his approach to workplace relationships. His ability to anticipate client needs, maintain professional standards, and treat every passenger with respect created a reputation that generated referrals and repeat business without requiring aggressive marketing or manipulative sales tactics. The loyalty he inspired in customers was based on actual value delivered rather than promises made, creating a sustainable business model built on the same principles that had made him such a valuable colleague and friend. The restaurant owner's financial collapse revealed the inevitable consequences of building an enterprise on exploitation rather than value creation. His pattern of inappropriate behavior toward female employees had created a toxic workplace culture that eventually drove away both staff and customers, who recognized the underlying problems with the organization's leadership. The same character flaws that had made him willing to manipulate vulnerable employees had also manifested in poor business decisions, ethical shortcuts, and the kind of reputation damage that eventually destroys even successful enterprises. His approach to business relationships mirrored his approach to personal relationships: transactional, exploitative, focused on short-term advantage rather than long-term value creation. The betrayal of trust that he had practiced with employees extended to customers, suppliers, and business partners, creating a network of damaged relationships that ultimately undermined his financial stability. The marketplace, like human relationships, eventually punishes those who consistently prioritize their own interests over genuine value creation and authentic relationship building. The message Maria sent requesting a ride represented the ultimate test of character and boundaries. Would Carlos allow past kindness to override present wisdom? Would old feelings trump new understanding about her character and values? Her approach to him in his moment of success revealed the same poor judgment that had characterized her original betrayal, the same inability to understand consequences or respect boundaries that had ended their previous relationship. The disappointment she had caused him was apparently forgotten in her mind, replaced by the assumption that his previous kindness indicated availability for future exploitation. This entitled approach to requesting help from someone she had betrayed demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of how relationships work and how trust, once broken, affects all future interactions. Her message represented not genuine remorse or recognition of her previous poor choices, but simply another attempt to use someone's good nature for her own convenience. The professional environment had taught her that she could move between relationships based on advantage and opportunity, but she was about to learn that authentic people maintain consistent standards regardless of their own success or others' circumstances. Carlos's decision to leave her message on read represented the perfect synthesis of boundary setting and consequence delivery, acknowledging her communication without rewarding her presumption or enabling her continued pattern of using others for convenience. This response demonstrated sophisticated emotional intelligence and hard-won wisdom about protecting oneself from people who view kindness as weakness and availability as entitlement. The loyalty she had discarded couldn't be retrieved simply because her circumstances had changed, and the trust she had violated couldn't be restored through casual requests for assistance. His silence in response to her message communicated more clearly than any words could have that some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt through convenient assumptions about others' willingness to forget past betrayals. This moment represented the natural culmination of choices made months earlier. Her choice to prioritize short-term advantage over authentic relationship, and his choice to learn from betrayal rather than become bitter, to maintain boundaries rather than enable continued exploitation. The broader life lesson embedded in this sequence of events reveals important truths about character, consequence, and the long-term effects of authentic versus inauthentic approaches to relationship and business. Carlos's success wasn't just professional vindication. It was proof that building anything lasting, whether relationships or enterprises, requires the same fundamental qualities of integrity, reliability, and genuine care for others' well-being. His refusal to respond to Maria's request demonstrated that success hadn't made him bitter or vengeful, but it had made him wise about protecting his energy and maintaining appropriate boundaries with people who had proven themselves unworthy of his authentic care. The frustration and disappointment he had experienced had been transformed into wisdom and discernment, allowing him to recognize manipulation, even when it came disguised as casual requests for assistance. The natural consequences that had unfolded for both Maria and the restaurant owner served as reminders that character eventually reveals itself through outcomes, that authentic approaches to relationship and business create sustainable success, while exploitative approaches eventually collapse under their own contradictions. The exquisite justice of leaving her message on read represented more than personal satisfaction. It demonstrated the importance of maintaining consistent standards, regardless of changing circumstances. Carlos's business success could have made him magnanimous toward past betrayals, could have tempted him to prove his success by being generous even to those who had treated him poorly. Instead, he chose to honor the lessons learned from his previous experience with Maria, recognizing that enabling her presumptuous request would only encourage continued patterns of using others without regard for their feelings or boundaries. The professional environment had taught him valuable lessons about human nature and the importance of investing emotional energy only in relationships that honor authentic connection. His silence in response to her message represented the mature understanding that some people will always view others' success as opportunities for their own advantage, and that protecting oneself from such people requires consistent boundary maintenance, regardless of one's ability to help. The sweetness of this natural justice lay not in revenge, but in the demonstration that authentic character creates lasting success while manipulation creates temporary advantage that eventually crumbles under the weight of its own contradictions. Don't let these insights die in your mind. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell to continue learning how to navigate workplace dynamics with wisdom, integrity, and the kind of strategic thinking that protects your authentic nature while building unshakable professional success. Your future self will thank you for making this investment in understanding human nature before it costs you everything.